those of you who are joining for the first time today, Third Path Institute is a national nonprofit celebrating over 2 decades of showing people how to do work, family, and leadership differently, and why applying the science of work-life integration helps everyone work smarter. Did you know that over 100,000 people checked out our free resources this past year, like the live and recorded version of our Thursday webinars? We're glad you're here today, and as you will quickly discover, it's a celebration of everything we've learned. And for those of you who are turning into to today's webinar, you're also going to have this privileged sneak look at what happened at our invitation-only Third Path Leader Summit. We have it every 2 years, and we invite this growing, amazing community of leaders who put our ideas into practice both personally and professionally. And we get together every 2 years to think about what are the next steps we can make towards change. And as you can imagine, this was a year where, like no other, where we had to think about what can we make sense of from what we've just gone through around the pandemic, and what does this mean for the future of our organizations? So I hope what I'm going to show you today completely inspires you about what's possible. And I hope it's also going to let you know that you don't have to think you have to have the answer today about what the future will look like for you in your work and life post-pandemic. Instead, a message I shared at the summit was to take some time for transition. What did we learn this past year? And how does this inform what we want going forward? So I don't think we should all have the answers today. Certainly, our amazing community didn't have all the answers, but I think we can take some time to hold on to the best parts of what we were taught this past year and see if we can keep them being part of how we shape our work and lives going forward. So what you're looking at, if you're seeing our screen today, is that we learned that there still are going to be maybe 4 different kinds of organizations after the pandemic. The one we're most excited about, I'll talk a little about first, which is what we call strategically flexible. And there were a number of leaders who represent strategically flexible workplaces at the summit. And they wouldn't tell you that they have it all figured out by any means, but that what they are committed to is really thinking about how they can support everyone in their organization to come up with a flexible solution that works well for them, so long as what we call a triple win. So it helps them get their work done, it helps them take care of their life responsibilities, and it works well for everybody that they work with. And what's very important about strategically flexible workplaces is that the senior leaders have already modeled this approach and probably experimented with this approach even before the pandemic happened, and they're willing to play a role in supporting their organizations to think more about this as they think about work and life after the pandemic. I'm going to tell you some stories to just show you how impressive this community was. And then we're going to hear from Karen Clark-Salinas to hear her takeaways from the summit too. There were many people who shared their stories. We had a couple of different town halls where different leaders talked about these ideas. And one of them was Ivan Axelrod, who I met a long time ago. And what's fun about Ivan's story is that he made a commitment to change in the later part of his career, 13 years ago, when his granddaughter was born. You've probably heard me talk about Ivan before on some of our Thursday webinars. But what's lovely about Ivan's story is that, he really was the first person in his organization to work differently, to work a compressed work week, not work on Mondays so he could take care of his granddaughter, and then when his grandson was born, to include him as well. So he was the first to make a change. But guess what? When the pandemic hit, Ivan became the person everybody turned to help figure out how to make it through the pandemic. And now, after being part of the summit, Ivan's putting a whole committee together at his organization to think about what have we learned from the pandemic. How can we work smartest going forward to really support people to live integrated lives, no matter what job they do, so long as it's a triple win? So he's a great example of what we saw all year long Our Third Path community really was thinking outside the box before the pandemic, and it helped them as they got through the pandemic, and it's making it more possible for them to imagine a different future as well. We also heard from Stephen Fernands. There were so many good stories. I want to share a little proudful moment because Stephen actually gave a shout out to me when he talked to the Third Path Summit about how they've adopted flexibility in their organization. And he really wanted to thank Third Path for encouraging him to think about flexibility before the pandemic hit. So his organization was more prepared because of the support that Third Path offered. That was a really proud moment for me. But Stephen's got an amazing story too. Lots of amazing stories, but the one I'll share is that, because he's been an attendee at our summits, he got very excited, not just about parental leave, but making sure that dads were supported to take leave as well. And so he's adopted, in addition to a maternity leave policy, a paternity leave policy. And wouldn't you know it, in the middle of the pandemic, in the area of his organization that is 24/7 operations, 4 dads needed to take parental leave. But because of what they've been learning, not only did they handle the pandemic, they also were able to support those 4 dads to figure out how to manage a 24/7 operations and take parental leave. Are you inspired yet? Let me keep on going. We also heard from Tonya Horton. She was part of our February webinar too, and you can hear more about Tonya if you go back to that February webinar on our website. But Tonya's organization's been virtual for 23 years. And guess what we learned from Tonya's organization? Because they had already learned how to think flexibly, they actually were able to grow their organization during the pandemic because they were already equipped to handle how to work remotely and support others to think about how to work remotely. So they were one leg up on people because of their ability to think flexibly before the pandemic. And so it was just one inspirational example after another about what's possible. As an organization, I feel so proud of this community. We are really showing the world we can run really successful businesses and support people to have time and energy for their lives outside of work. And one of the core things we talked about, and I don't know if everybody has heard us talk about this on a webinar before, is that it's not just about flexibility. If you want to follow an integrated approach, you need to think about what we call capacity management too, both at a personal level, at a team level, and an organizational level. We certainly had to do that with our team at Third Path. All of them are parents. All of them were dealing with major changes from the pandemic. And over the course of the year, it wasn't just that they needed flex. They also needed support around how much energy and time they had available for work, and for us to work together to think about what were the right goals for us to focus on this year, and what did we not have time and energy to focus on. That's where integration comes from, flexibility and capacity management. And we talked a lot about this because if we want to really support an organization to be strategically flexible, people's lives keep on changing, and we need to keep on coming up with answers for how their work and life situation is changing. It's not a one-stop, we're done solution. It's an evolving solution. So it was a super exciting event, very inspiring stories. Karen, I'm so glad you were there. You're one of the amazing ILAs that makes up the Third Path community. For those of you who haven't heard about an ILA before, they're the integrated life advocates, often career counselors, work-life coaches, couples counselors, who help us facilitate these events, help us run our calls. And we could not run our events without them. So Karen, I'm so glad you were there. What were some of the takeaways you had, or things that really inspired you from the summit, before we get into hearing a little bit about how some people can put these ideas into action as the next part of our webinar? Karen, what were some takeaways?
Well, thank you, Jessica. And inspired is truly the word. I was so excited after the summit, all the great stories we heard, and the great concepts that you put forth. So I think one of the things I'm really glad to hear about this idea of a strategically flexible work culture, something to help us move away from the work first culture, which makes it very difficult to integrate work and life. So I love hearing about strategic flex, because I also believe that when the pandemic started, there was no strategy available or not time to strategize. Everyone was just working remotely, literally overnight. And so, as you talk about this time of transition that we are moving through as we get to the next phase of, whatever post-pandemic, life is going to look like, it's just nice to think about being intentional and strategic. And that's also one of my favorite things about this concept of the triple win. So I think what's really important is to think about how, when you're trying to be strategic and do what serves the individual, what serves the work, and what serves all of the people involved in that work, it doesn't take away from the quality, high quality work. It just means that the mission critical and the important work is really what's at the top of the list, and so much effort and intention is going towards that. And then the last thing, which was a very common message from a lot of the people at the summit, is as we go through this transition phase, as we try and collect ourselves, take a few deep breaths from this past year, we need a lot of empathy. We need empathy from what we've been through, and we need empathy for what's still yet to come, because there are likely things that we haven't even anticipated. So I just really like that focus on empathy.
Yeah, no, there was, in fact, that's what I'm going to get to next, is to really think about who helped us get through this pandemic, and the people who helped us get through it had a lot of empathy. And we're going to talk about that. And actually, another word that comes to my mind is recovery. We've been through something huge, and we need some time to recover. And so to really think of this transition period as time to take stock on what happened, time to recharge from what happened, time to sort out what happened. We really need some recovery time as we think ahead about and make the best choices about, both personally and for organizations, around what's possible and what's next. Well, one of the other big ahas I had as I went through the summit, and this is probably something I think about when we have the summit every 2 years, it's not that these inspiring leaders that I just told you about and the other ones who shared their stories at the summit started at this strategically flexible workplace. No. As you're listening in today, please understand, they, just like you, are probably working in workplaces that aren't as supportive, that don't quite get to understand the possibilities of how we can create more strategic flex. And what happened is they started their careers where they were, but they were clear themselves about what was important. They were clear as a family system about what was important. And then they moved on and became a team leader and supported their teams to think differently, maybe even if their whole organization wasn't doing things differently. And over time, they then became leaders in their organizations, promoting more change and more ways to think differently. So if you're listening in today and saying, oh, I want to be part of that strategically flexible workplace, great, go find one. You can do it. Or if you feel like you're part of an organization that isn't thinking as provocatively and exciting in these ways, you can still make this happen. And so one of the biggest takeaways I had was just like what Karen was talking about. And by the way, all of our speakers will be available to answer some questions later on. So you can go ahead and put these into the chat box, and Sergio is going to read them to us later. We love that you're here live. We want to answer your questions, support you on this journey. But what I learned is no matter what workplace you're in, you can become a manager who's helping your team managed better. In fact, we had a number of leaders who were part of the summit who were not from, the most supportive workplaces, more like a work-first workplace, where in order to move ahead in your career, it is expected that you would put work first. But these managers were still figuring out how to do things differently. They were providing some bright spots of what was possible. So I'm thinking about this one leader in particular who works in a work-first workplace where it's pretty likely they're going to probably go back to on-site work, regardless of the success that people had of working remotely this past year. Well, what I know about this leader is that he does a great job of helping people think about, he's like their personal coach, helping people think about, hey, given this is the culture of our organization, how can you be smartest, even with this culture? So you can be a person who's in the corner, rooting for your employees, thinking differently. You can look for that manager in your workplace. Or again, go back to that February webinar that we just had, and you can hear about a supportive manager who worked with their entire team to create a more reasonable workload. So you could, look for that manager in your organization who's more willing to think differently, or you can become that manager in your organization who's willing to think differently. So you can also get inspired, and you've heard this all year long, by downloading a free copy of our leader guide. Many of the people who participated, in fact, I think everybody who's in that guide was part of the summit. So you can kind of get an inside, close look at who these people are and how they're doing things differently by downloading our Third Path Leader Guide. And what you'll see in their stories is that they really worked as a team. That's where it started, a team at home, thinking about the life that they wanted, and then staying true to that life as they reached for those goals at work. And they probably took some risks, and we write about some of the risks that they took to reach for those goals at work. They wanted an integrated life. They got clear as a couple at home about how they wanted that life to look, and then they went ahead and took some risks and reached for those goals at their workplaces. But even then, better than just reading about this in our wonderful guide, what we're going to do next is have you hear a wonderful story about somebody who's been thinking this way his whole life. And before we get there, I want to say one last thing to help frame the story you're going to hear from Christopher in just a minute. In order to live an integrated life, you need to get good at what we call firm but flexible boundary setting. If you want to do work and have time for family, work and be an artist, work and elder care, whatever it is, you need to make time for both those things. And so you have to get smart about boundary setting. And this is true for all family systems who want to follow this integrated approach, whether they're two dads, two moms, mom and dad. We also had a great example of a shared care family where the parents are separated. This is an approach all families can take. We started our year off with a great example of a shared care family where it's shared between generations. So lots of options around how we can think about who helps us create this family system approach where we both the adults in the family system get smart around boundary setting. So I think this will probably come up when we talk about Christopher. Welcome, Christopher. We're so glad you're here. I've known you for a while. It's fun to finally get to tell your story or have you tell your story on our Thursday webinar. Tell the audience a little bit about, how much has an integrated approach been important to your life, and what do you think got you excited about kind of creating a life that had work but also plenty of time for family? Welcome, Christopher.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me. I think a lot of my parenting goes to my childhood and not having my dad around. I was very much adamant about being as active a parent as possible. I was also very influenced by going to grad school when my daughter was a newborn. It was a program designed for people in school administration who wanted to potentially become a head of a school. And all I kept hearing was, you're not going to have any time to spend with your family. And it just kind of turned me off. And I kind of went the exact opposite direction, was even told that it was career suicide to decide to stay home. But it has led to just a beautiful balance. I'm able to do the things that I want to do. My wife is able to do the things that she wants to do. But most importantly, our daughter has a really rich experience that starts with her education, but revolves around all of the other things that make her who she is outside of school as well.
Yeah.
That's a brief response to that.
Yes, no, it's a great response, and I think you're not alone. When I was at Wharton, certainly the grad school I went to, the message was, you got to put work first. That's how you're going to succeed. And I too felt like this, person who was like, I don't think that's what I want. So Christopher, tell us more about, you things, as anybody who's listening in today understands. Things keep on changing. So what happened when your daughter was very young, and then how did it change over time?
So, as I think it's stated there, I decided to stay home with her, finish that grad program, and decided to stay home and have that experience. I always imagined that it would be a couple of years, and then I would go back and become a school administrator. I thoroughly enjoyed being home. I was able to find some other opportunities. One of those was some of the work that I did as a blogger, that opened up connections and helped me develop connections with a lot of fatherhood-based organizations across the country. So I ended up writing, doing, like, being interviewed for magazines and TV shows, and a life that I had never really imagined. But I greatly missed teaching and being a part of an educational community. So what I ended up doing was finding a great job working at a college in New York City where I live, and being able to construct a schedule that allowed me to do what I wanted to do, but also be able to pick up my daughter, and be able to bring her home and have that time with her after school, because that was a very big part. That was something that I really felt like I needed. And now, my daughter is good to go with her school. I'm sure she is about to enter 5th grade in the fall, so she's going to move away from needing me to pick her up, and kind of doing a lot more activities after school at her school. Hopefully, come this fall, we'll see. But yeah, that's basically where we are at this point. And my wife, I've gotten to see her more. I look at it as if I get to see her more often, with everything that's happened with the pandemic. At some point, we'll see where we'll figure out where if she'll continue to work from home or not. But that's pretty much where we are at this point, and where I am. So it's kind of an ideal situation right now, but it took some time and some soul searching to get there.
Yeah, well, we want to hear more about that soul searching, because I think people are listening into you going, "Wow, that sounds pretty good to me. How did he do that?" I want to zero in on a couple of things before we talk about this year and how it's been this year, because I think that's what's on a lot of people's minds is, how did you make it through this year? I want to talk more about that chapter 2, because I think people forget about this. Again, I get it. This past year was different. So what I'm about to say, don't forget that I know that. But normally, I call the school age years, starting with preschool, the golden years, because you do get into this routine where your kids are hopefully very happily going off to school every day. It's a fairly predictable routine. And if you've built a family system that has some wiggle room in it, yes, you can handle the school closings and the snow days. Maybe you've even, figured out some fun things to do over the summers when there's summers, could be this opportunity for families to really have some fun. So I see the school years as this kind of golden opportunity. And, this idea that you picked up your daughter and brought her home after school, it just brings a smile to my face, Christopher, because I too, Jeff and I both really liked being able to hang out with our kids after school. Tell us more about, what was that like? Why was that important for your family to have that time together after school? And we will talk about this year in a second, but talk about it pre-pandemic. Why was that important?
I think we really see value in having her kind of decompress with one of us and not kind of hear it from someone else as much. She is the type of kid who, she pretty much, she does things that and really throws herself into those things. So school is just her happy place for the most part. And she wants to talk about everything she did and everything that she learned and all the games that she played during recess. And it's freshest in her head right after school. So 3-4 hours go by and she is kind of moved on to the next thing at that point. And we just saw the joy that it gave her to be able to share that with us. So we really wanted to make sure that she continued to have that opportunity for as long as she was willing to share all aspects of her school day. Yeah.
And you know what, Christopher, what you probably have heard from people, because you've probably listened to their stories like I listened to their stories, for many, this pandemic opened their eyes to that gift that you already knew about, right? Mm-hmm. So suddenly they're actually having some time instead of just arriving at 6 p.m. at night when everybody's kind of tired and hungry. They've been hanging out, maybe more than they expected or necessarily want to going forward, but they've been hanging out as a family more, and they've been having more of those, times to decompress as a family. I can't tell you how many people have told me they're enjoying family dinners together. They're enjoying that I have one leader I'm thinking about where she's really been enjoying, they're in the part of the country where schools were actually mostly still working on site, and she would pick up her daughter's kids, friends, and they'd all hang out after school at her house. And she says, the first year I've ever got to meet my daughter's friends. So I think what you were seeing pre-pandemic, so many people are really having enjoyed this past year. It's been a silver lining this past year. Does that sound like something you've heard other people talk about, or you're imagining might be true?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks have kind of almost reconnected with their family from some of the things that I've heard. And but most importantly, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I didn't realize my child was into this, or that I didn't know that they were learning this in class, or more or around to help with homework if their child needed it. And it's been really I think nice to see people kind of find any sort of a silver lining in this awful thing that we've had to witness. And so I think some people are finding that silver lining, which has been great.
Yeah, and good to remind us, please. Again, I don't want to minimize how horrid this has been and how much loss we've had this year. Families losing loved ones, people losing jobs. So good to remind us that this has been a very, very, very difficult year. But there has been a couple silver linings. I want to tell you, and I'm not trying to be the Pollyanna here. here's the other silver lining of the approach that Christopher and his wife are taking. So your daughter's X age, and then they become a teenager. Well, guess what? And you're not there yet, so you don't know this yet. But if you've been around in that after-school hours all along, when they become a teenager, it's just very normal for them to have you be part of their lives. And so they grow up to be an age where maybe they don't tell you as much what happened from their days. But I guarantee, because you have a pattern of just being around, emptying the dishwasher, making a snack, doing whatever you do in the afternoons while they're doing whatever they're doing, inevitably what happens is they also know it's normal to tell you when they're ready about what their day was like. And so that connection can continue when you have teenagers in a beautiful way. Thinking about this past year in particular, though, so you guys were both working from home, and your daughter was still able to go mostly to school in September. Is there things that you learned this year that you think, shifts in your schedule or changes in your approach that you want to hold on to? Or maybe because you already had adopted so many of these ideas before the pandemic, there's not really a lot that needed to be held on to. Any insights from this past year for you guys?
I think that my daughter has missed out a little bit on the social aspect of getting to school and maybe taking the school bus. As I think that was kind of a critical part of her experience up until really last year. So I think we really want her to be able to do that again. I think the plan is still for me to go and pick her up, but we want her to have that opportunity. And sometimes it's even just sitting on the bus, but being around some of the other students and having that energy, I think, is something that was missed. Yeah. I think we have really greatly valued having more meals together, and I think the concern is going forward. She's an athlete and a journalist, and if Janelle is commuting again, and we just aren't going to have those same opportunities to kind of come together and have meals together, and it might be few and far between. And so I think we are all about making a conscious effort to kind of make some of those mandatory and planning around that time. That's something that we've talked about, and we really have enjoyed that. We've had more time in those moments, and we often just spend time talking about the things that we're grateful for. We are kind of that family. And I think we've been doing much more of that because there's just so much awfulness that has happened over the last year and a half. So we do feel grateful and want to continue that to some extent. But those are really the primary things, just making sure that she continues to have those social opportunities, but also that we have those family times too. Because there's still just a lot of uncertainty as to what the schedule and things are going to look like.
Yes, there is, isn't there? We're not really through. It's not really 100% behind us yet.
That's right.
Especially when, I don't even want to go there, but when we think about what's happening globally, we're certainly not behind us yet. So again, not to make light of some really big challenges that are still happening. But thank you for bringing up meals, and thank you for that point that we can be intentional about this, because I do think sometimes the world got stopped for us, and we can let it take control of our lives again going forward, or we can be intentional and say, you know what, it can do this. It can make us change our schedules this much, but not the full way. We can still hold on to this. We can still commit to a certain number of family meals together if that's important to us. So thank you for raising that issue. It's a great example. Again, there might be something else that you want to add to the list, but I hope what everybody's listening in today is hearing that, work-life integration has a way of really helping us live better lives. We certainly heard at the summit how it makes our organizations smarter and better and be able to attract and retain the best people. But it also is really about living really stronger and healthier lives, stronger relationships as a couple. I've heard people talk about, having a stronger relationship with their children now that they've kind of adopted this more integrated approach this last year. I've heard lots of people talk about that they've had more time for exercise, or that they've just taken a walk in the middle of the day, which they didn't normally do. No surprise, family dinners is something we've heard people say this last year, allowed them to follow a more integrated approach, and in general feel more connected as a family. So no surprise, a number of the things that Christopher is seeing in his own life, we're hearing from lots of families that this has been a year with lots of heartache for too many families, but for many there's been some real silver linings. Christopher, there might be one last thing you want to share about your story. I will come back to you at the end of the webinar, but one last thing or insight you want to share before we hear from Karen.
I would say that the biggest thing for me has been to really make sure that I listen to my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I think about advice that I was given, my wife and I were given from her preschool, the head of her preschool, who said that kids are not they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And that just, I have been in education for, maybe even 2 decades at that point. And that was the first time I heard that. And it just made me think very differently. And so it's been much more about the support. Just recently she mentioned feeling a certain amount of pressure when she plays basketball, because she's often been the best player on her team, and that does come with a level of pressure. And she shared her truth with us and asked for us to kind of, just let her figure that out, take a step back. And we did that. And then she went out and just played one of the best games I've ever seen her play. So I think that's the key. Just making sure that your children have that opportunity to speak their truth, speak up, and really spend time hearing them. And so I think one of the things that so many of us have worked on are our listening skills, because we're on camera and we can't really hide. We really have to focus and listen. And so I really value the fact that I've spent much more time hearing my daughter, just kind of break down how she's feeling, what she's going through, and trying to support that to the best that I can.
Oh my goodness. I learn something every time I run one of these webinars. Kids are not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time, and giving them space to speak their truth then helps them go back out in life and do their very best. Wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Christopher. That is a very profound, very accurate description of parenting. Thank you. Wonderful. So Karen, where we're going to go next, we're going to talk about, you've been listening in. You've been listening in to this webinar, and you've been hearing inspirational stories, leaders who are helping their organizations become strategically flexible workplaces, an amazing family who's thought outside the box about what men and women can do to create a supportive environment for each of them as they balance work and parenting together as a family system. And where we want to go next is to think about, so how do people go down this journey? And we're going to start by talking about some of the free resources we have on our website. This year in particular, we've been making a number of resources available for free, where you can download them and use them. But we're going to start with this one because I think there's a lot of truth in it, that if you really want to make a change in how you do things at work so you have time, in this case, time to hang out with your daughter after school, your son, your family, have time for your aging parent, the courage often starts at home. What do we mean by this, Karen? And what have you learned around this in the work you do with parents?
Well, I kind of think about this from the idea that often we think that, the problem is at work. And if we could just
Mm-hmm.
fix our work situation, that then the rest of life would kind of just magically get better. And obviously, workload, capacity management, those kinds of things can be real issues that can be improved. But I just like and believe, as being very accurate, that when you and your partner, whether you're living together or still partnered up or not, but you have children and maybe the home that the children live in, you're working on that together. It just makes it so much easier and makes you so much stronger when you're clear about what it is you want for this family system, and also knowing that you're going to have that conversation multiple times over the lifespan, so to speak, of this family, at least all times together. And it just makes it so, they become touchstones for you as a couple, touchstones as your values and desires for your children. Chris mentioned many things that he and his wife, based on their values, really wanted for their daughter, and that I'm sure helped light the way for the steps and the actions that they needed to take. And when they were clear on a lot of that, that also then helped inform some work decisions.
Yeah, yeah. So, the very top of the list is, getting clear about what your priorities are, and then figuring out how you can get aligned around those. Sometimes it's really easy to get alignment. Sometimes it's a little bit of work. And then both parents really thinking about how they can both contribute to kind of setting some limits around work so they have time and energy for family. In fact, we have a really good blog up now about how to afford your preferred plan. We had Matt Becker on one of our Thursday webinars. He also participated in the summit, and he was talking about how to create a life-centered approach to finances. Maybe even Christopher can share some thoughts about this later in the webinar. Because again, once we kind of think outside the box about what we really want, get aligned around it, then we can kind of figure out, is there an obstacle and how do we overcome it together, and make it work. And I loved your point. It's something you're going to have to come back to many, many times. If you think about a moment in your life, Karen, I wasn't even going to go this direction, but I know that you've had some really cool decisions in your own life. What's an example of where you saw yourself once again having to think about these issues, surprised to notice that you had to think about these issues, but that because you had already strengthened that muscle about what are my priorities, how do I get aligned, how do I make this change? Any moments in your life where you've seen this surprisingly come useful again as you had to look at these issues a second or third time?
Sure. This may not be the one you were thinking of, but divorce is a major time for rethinking, and I had to reconnect, which wasn't hard, but really, double down on what was important to me as a mother for my 3 kids. And then, other times, building, remarrying, retiring from one career and pivoting to my coaching business now, all kinds of different opportunities. But I will say one of the best things about being in those situations is that you get an opportunity to kind of reconnect with what's really important to you. And then you can say, oh yeah, that's me. That's what I believe. That's what I value. That's what I think part of my purpose is. These are the things or the people that I'm really willing to go to bat for, to stand up for. This is what gets me out of bed every morning and puts a huge smile on my face. So there's
Yeah.
great value in having those moments.
Yes, yes. Even the tough times help us get smarter about what really is important and how to really reach for that. And if you're listening in, another great place to begin is you might remember that every spring we launch something called overwhelm mitigation groups. And so
Mhm.
if you're saying to yourself, you know what, I want to set up my life this year so I have time for work, but time for something else, and I don't know how to get this started. Well, guess what? You can join one of these OMG groups, and guess who helps run these groups? Karen does. So, this is a really rich community full of really good opportunities for you to learn, figure out how to take a next step. Speaking of the ongoing process, there's one other tool that's up on our website that is something that you could use at any point in the process. Literally, you could get off today's webinar, download this tool, and just use it for yourself, or maybe you and your partner could think about it together. It's a tool that helps you start understanding, well, how are things right now? What's working? What's not working? Just getting clear yourself is a great place to begin, or if you feel ready, you and your partner are thinking about this. Karen, is this a tool that you've seen useful for people, and what are some insights? Maybe you've even helped some of our community go through a workshop on this. Tell us what you've learned.
So yes, this tool is very helpful, and it shows up in lots of different versions. I'd say across kind of health and wellness and life coaching and that kind of thing. But it's really hard to be intentional and kind of figure out those next best steps for yourself if you don't know your starting point. And
Yep.
so that's what this tool is really great for. And depending on how old your children are, you could possibly even adapt this to and ask them to do something similar to get an idea of how they're feeling about how the family is working or their own lives. We've heard a lot, or we've heard periodically said that one of the hard things for kids during this past year is that losing a year of, we'll just say, 14 years on this earth it feels much more monumental than it does if you're 54 and have to spend a year in a very different scenario, scary scenario. And so, there's a lot of work families can do to help move their kids through these next phases. So this is a great tool. And again, it's that taking stock. Where am I? Do I like what I see on this picture? This becomes a visual picture. And if I don't like all that I see, where's a place that feels reasonable for me to try to make some change?
Yeah, yeah. So for those of you who might not be able to see the visual because you're just listening to the audio at some point, this is a circle that you're filling in and saying, what's my sense of how well work is going, finances, our well-being, our connection as a couple. It kind of divides up the circle into 8 pieces of a pie, and you get to sort out which ones feel like they're really going well, which ones you need to focus on and improve. I remember talking to a couple about this, and they realized that there was one of the areas that wasn't going so well, but they knew that they just didn't have the capacity to pay attention to that area, and they both could agree, hey, you know what? We're going to get to this a year from now, but right now these other things are more important. So it can even help you prioritize what it is that you want to start focusing on. And it's definitely something you can keep on coming back to. It's a good starting point. It can get the conversation going with you and your partner, you and your whole family, as Karen's suggesting. It can also be something you come back to and check back in on and see how you're doing. I have to keep one eye on the clock. I knew this was going to be the case. Too much time was going to go by too quickly. We're going to get to a point where you guys get to ask some questions. You might have a question for Karen. You might have a question for Christopher. You can put them in the chat box, and Sergio is going to read them to us. So we're getting to that point where we're going to answer your questions as you're listening in today. But I wanted to end by sharing a little insight from me, then seeing if Christopher wanted to add one more thought from his experience around living this integrated life as a family, and then give Karen a chance for a last thought as well. When I started Third Path, this is a quote from one of the resources we offer. I really thought I was doing it for my kids. But, and I really had fun. Christopher, I have strong memories of picking up my son after school and playing TV tag with him and his buddies after school. And, you don't get to do that forever. He's 24 now. So that was a lot of fun. It was a good excuse to play. But it also got me really smarter about how I approach my work. This past year, I actually decided to change things and create a half day on Wednesdays in the mornings where I didn't do work because I learned that pattern of having a break in the middle of the week and doing something besides work made me work smarter. And it's what I used to do when I was a parent. But I think what I didn't realize was how much it was a gift to me and Jeffrey. And that Jeff and I learned some skills together about designing a life together. And that is something we are using today and we'll continue to use as work and life keeps on changing. And so it started out for my kids, but it turns out it really creates a very, very healthy family system that is can rely on some approaches and thinking that allows them to be flexible for the long run as they keep on solving how to make it all work. Christopher, as you listened in and saw some of these different ideas, anything come to mind that helped you overcome the hurdle? What was the hurdle? Anything else you want to add from your story before we hear from Karen?
No, I think I touched on the biggest obstacle for me was being told that the decision that to stay home and kind of focus on parenting was going to be career suicide, and I might not have followed the path that I think most of the people that I worked with thought I was going, like, or the path that I seem to be destined to be on. But I have created something that is so much more fulfilling. I still get to teach and interact with students. I get to supervise and observe people in the special ed program at Hunter, and so I still get to do all the stuff that I had hoped to be able to do, and I get to have that time with my daughter. So, did I have to make some sacrifices? Absolutely, but in the long run, I think it's going to be worth it. It has been so far, and I think it will continue to be.
Yeah, no, that is a great message, and it's especially important to hear that from a man talking about that, because what we really saw with the pandemic is that we still fall into these traditional assumptions about who's the one who's going to provide the care. And as you know, for the last 20 years, Third Path is saying men are equally capable of doing caregiving. So thank you for being that role model and reminding us about that, Christopher. Karen, any last thoughts you have before we check in with Sergio to see if there's any questions from those listening in today? Karen, any thoughts from you?
Sure. I would just say, what work-life integration has meant to me, for me, is really everything. And what it gives me right now is also an opportunity to continue on the journey with my kids, who are all now in their 20s and working on their adult lives and all of that. It keeps me on the path with them, and it also helps me see a future of, should there be grandchildren, I can find roles or ways to support them. And so it just really means everything as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Actually, you're reminding me, I just was on a board call with my amazing Third Path board, And one of our leaders who spoke at the summit is part of my board, and she was talking about how her daughters watched her do shared care with her husband and now are looking for partners in life who they can do shared care with. And they're having those conversations even before having kids. So yes, this is a multi-generational way of thinking and learning. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Hey, Sergio, there might be a question for one of our speakers today out there before we get to near the close of our call.
Yes, so we do have a question, and I just want to congratulate all of you guys for this amazing webinar. And the question says, what is the first recommendation you could give to someone who is starting to think about work-life integration?
Oh, wonderful. All right, so maybe I'm going to let Karen start with that, and then we'll have, if Christopher wants to add something, what's the first step? What's the first thing they could do, Karen?
So I think first step gets at that taking stock kind of thing. So if it's having the conversations or doing the thinking that some of the free resources that Jessica mentioned that are on the Third Path website, Strong Core at Home, this current coordinates, really get an idea of where are you, so you can see if it aligns with what you want, and then that will begin to show the path that you might take to get there. And if it's feeling hard to know that next best step, then again, Third Path is a tremendous resource, and particularly with the ONG groups, the current group that I'm facilitating right now, all of the people in it just seem so happy to know that they're not alone, that the challenges that they are struggling with, it's not just them, and that they enjoy the opportunity to connect with other working parents with similar struggles and a commitment to finding a better way.
Wonderful. Great advice. Thank you very much. Christopher, you do not need to offer an answer, but maybe something comes to your mind as about an important first step.
I mean, I think just having an honest dialogue with your partner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the only thing that I would say, and I'll leave it at that.
And by the way, that's such a strong thing to foster in a relationship, right? So you're having that honest dialogue because you're going to have many honest dialogues, and so you're really starting a process there that's a core to a healthy relationship. I would add, dream big. Dream big. Don't just look around you and say this is all that's available. Dream big. You can dream big by reading that Third Path Leader Guide. There's so many inspiring stories there. But even if you're not even thinking about family, one of my board members, early in his career, way before he got married and had kids, said, I want to do work and something else. And so he very intentionally started teaching a class because that was a way for him to say to his workplace, look, he did this in partnership with his boss and talked about it, but basically he really got good at saying, I'm going to teach this class and do my job. And he was very transparent about it. And so even before kids and family, he started learning how to do integration in a very transparent, successful way that then gave him some hope about, okay, later on, if I want to make this work with kids, I've already seen how I can do work and something else. So lots of great ways to begin the journey. No wrong place to begin. Hey, Sergio, there might be one last question before we wrap up today's webinar.
No more questions.
All right. Wow. Well, thank you, everybody. And don't forget, we have one more webinar for this season of webinars, our annual Father's Day event that will be happening in June. And also, please make sure you check us out in social media. Sergio's been doing a great job of sharing great resources, inspirational visuals. So connect with us on social media. It's a great way to stay involved. Thanks, everybody, for being here.